right now I'm onboarding as in SETEM. I started in May, first as a communication officer, but now I've moved to become the future campaign officer of the electronics, fair electronics campaign there. And so now I'm working hand in hand with Judith to move forward with all the things that we work in the campaign. And Judith, your turn.
Hi everybody. Hi, and thank you for being here. So I am Judith. I work with Claudia at SETEM. SETEM, I was going to introduce later, but it's better if we do now. In SETEM is an organization which is based, we work in SETEM Catalonia. There's also SETEM Madrid. There's also other SETEMs in other parts of Spain, but we are based in Barcelona. And what we do as an organization is try to raise awareness and create citizenship that is aware of what is happening in other countries. So we want to improve the living conditions and working conditions specifically in countries where the goods that we are buying are produced. So in order to do this, we work in different areas. We have different campaigns. Claudia and me are working on the electronics campaign. We also have a garment campaign. So I suppose you know the Clean Clothes campaign. So in Spain, we are the ones managing the Clean Clothes campaign in Spain. We also have armed banking. So this one is more on what is behind the banks and where are they investing our money. And then we have food sovereignty. So these are like the 4 areas that we touch. And related to myself, well, I have been working in the electronics campaign for 2 years now, and in the garments, in the Clean Clothes campaign for the last 6 months. And what we do here is we participate in trainings. We do raising awareness activities and communication campaigns. We work also on lobbying to try to change things from the beginning. And we also participate in research. Okay, so I don't know, more or less, this is it. Regarding our profile, like what could you do in future? I don't know. In my case, I have like moved a lot from very different areas. So my idea would be to say that you can do whatever, because in reality, you can change. It's not that you begin in a place and you have to stay in that all your life. So I began as an IT consultant, then I worked on management consultant, and then I moved into the development area. I did a postgraduate and then some volunteering abroad, and then I could move towards international development. It took some time. And after that, I worked in different countries as a project manager, and now I'm a campaign officer. So that's a bit our, our background. So this is a bit what I was saying about SETEM. What is SETEM as an organization and what is our goal? This moment, I have this in the middle. This is what we will be seeing today. So the introduction, then we will see the electronic supply chain. So what are the violations during the electronic supply chain to have a broad picture? We'll move then to current initiatives to promote a fair and sustainable supply chains. So here we will be presenting 3 initiatives. Then what will the future bring for electronics? Here we will go into the electric vehicle transition. And to end, we will do an activity. You will do an activity, in fact. We will just moderate it to see what you can do as young fair trade advocates. Okay. So here, just a figure. I think all of us are very conscious that everybody that we know has a smartphone, and this is quite global. So there are like 3.5 billion smartphones in the world right now. And this is just so that we know what is the volume we're speaking about and how many people are working in this industry and are affected by it. Sure. So going on onto the supply chain and what are the different phases of the supply chain. Here we can see a small graphic on the different moments. We could say the supply chain in electronics begins in the design. So here already many decisions are taken. We would move to resource extraction, manufacturing, transport, use, and end of life. Okay, so many of these moments of the supply chain take place in different countries, mostly in the global south, but also every time more in Eastern European countries. We will go now into each of them. So first phase would be the design. Here is where they decide basically the duration of the product and also the materials. So this is very important. So already here you're deciding how this product will end. Then would come resource extraction. What are some of the social impacts related to resource extraction? Here we find conflicts, we find illicit trade of minerals, there is armed groups behind, there is child labor. Some of the environmental impacts would involve deforestation, too much use of water, biodiversity loss. There are like many research and videos and information that you can read on this. I mean, today it's just to show you, but I think we will be sharing with you the links to many more documents. Next phase would be manufacturing. So where does this usually take place? Mostly Southeast Asia, but as I was saying, there are each time more factories in Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria. The kind of violations that we can find at this moment are very diverse. We can go from forced labor, and here what we are speaking about are, for example, migrant workers that are working, say, in Thailand and coming from Myanmar, and that are they pay to get the job. And so they come already with a debt. So their passports, in many cases, are taken to make them pay this debt. So it can happen that they are working to pay a debt. Other situations that you can find in this moment are, you have them all here. I would say some of them. They're very low salaries. So this makes people have to do extra time, and this is like compulsory in order to be able to live. We have very little safety and security at work, mostly because there's little information, so they don't know what toxics they're working with. All these situations with COVID have been like increased in a very imagine how things are now. And another of the big areas that would be problematic is the non-possibility of unionizing. So many of the countries where products are made, or they don't allow unions, or if they do, they're very controlled and prosecuted. So basically, without unions, workers cannot demand the rights. They cannot improve any of the other things that we are speaking about because they don't have a collective way of negotiating. So all of these impacts are important, but not being able to have a union would make it really difficult to improve anything. Related to environmental impacts, here we have emissions, we have also excessive water use and the emission of toxic particles. Going on, here's just a data like this so that you know that only 0.5% of the retail price is used for labor costs. So even if our cell phones are really expensive, very little of it is getting to any of these workers, which makes that this sector should be, it's quite shameful that the conditions are what they are. It's also shameful in the garment industry, of course, but smartphones are not cheap. So the difference on what is getting, the workers are getting and what we are paying is extremely big. Here, going back the supply chain, we would get to the transport phase. So here we have also increased precariousness. I suppose you have already heard a lot about what's going on in Amazon and other similar companies, and also the impacts related to the transport. We would then get to the use. That's us consuming. And during COVID, we've seen all of these social impacts increase to very big levels because the data has been used in many ways. And in the same way that we have possibilities of using the social networks to communicate and to improve conditions, this has also challenges. And we'll get then to the end of life days. So what happens when we finish with our phone or with our computer? Where does this end? So usually this ends in the global south. There is child labor involved in these sites. We will afterwards see. And there's lack of health. There's a lot of environmental impacts because usually in these sites, if the cell phone gets to Ghana, for example, they will extract the minerals by burning. So the emissions will go to the air, they will go to the earth, they will go to the river. I have included here some data. So you can see in green would be like the countries that send e-waste. In red would be the countries receiving e-waste. And here I wanted to share a moment just to make you an idea of what it involves.
This is Agbogbloshie, a suburb of Accra, the capital of Ghana. But local residents have given it a nickname, Sodom and Gomorrah. It's the home of the biggest electronic waste dump and is a livelihood for many. First, it feeds them, then it kills them. This is one of the most polluted areas with toxins and toxic metals on the African continent.
This one copies.
Emmanuel Akandirike has spent his entire childhood at the dump site. He's never been to school, so he can't go elsewhere. For him, this job is the only way to sustain himself.
I'm framing my 14 years. Say, you will grown up, Papa, Demimba. No cook, Massy. Or cook, Mass, no jam or no Mimba and Baba Yajuma. No Kacham say, Mia Jumana, Ayaka Crow, Baba, Babana, quick cool.
Ghanaian laws forbid Emmanuel to work at all until he comes of age. But no one pays any attention.
And you see the small children, those who work here, some of them don't have parents. Some of them father died, some of them their mothers died, and some of them their mothers are there, but they don't take care of them. You know, as a small boy, and some of them they can't work here. After 12, they will go back to school.
Some of the current initiatives that are happening to promote fair and sustainable supply chains. So there are many things going on, but we will only introduce 3 of them. So the first one would this from the beginning be different. Okay, so here just some more information on the e-waste because this initiative is related to repair. This is the volume of e-waste on 2019. So there is like 53 million tons of e-waste generated annually. And out of these, there is only like 17% that are documented, that are collected in the correct way. The rest is like a mystery, where it goes, what happens to it. And mostly it will end up like in dumps, like the one we saw before in Agoblashi. Here is just part of for what you have just been writing. I think you already know all this, but just to be quick, these are the phases we're speaking about. So here in the end of life, we could go back to recycling, or we could go back to repair and reuse. So the initiative that I will be sharing right now is the Rights Repair campaign.
Planned obsolescence? It's gone too far. Mystery screws, too much glue, parts that are hard to find, too expensive, or non-replaceable. And there are even legal barriers. The system is rigged to stop us fixing our stuff. We need a universal right to repair for all consumers and repairers. Products should last longer and be repairable by design. Fixing a product with a simple fault shouldn't cost more than buying a new one. Spare parts and repair manuals should be accessible to everyone for the entire lifetime of a product. And when we win, at the point of purchase, we'll see scores on whether a product can be repaired or not. And with that ability to choose longer-lasting products, we'll fix things.
There are organizations all over Europe in the Rights of Repair campaign, and what they are lobbying for, what we are all lobbying for, is basically what the name says, to be able to repair. For this to be possible, there are many things that need to be changed, many legislations that need to be changed, and these go like one at a time. So now it's batteries, now it's chargers, now it's a long process, but I am sure that we will get there. One is targeting European Commission. There is different moments in the year where things are happening and they ask for help on communication. Sometimes it's locally, sometimes it's per country. So they are asking, okay, in Spain, we need the European parliamentaries, the Spanish ones, to vote for this. This can happen in different countries, or it may be a common action happening in general. There is this Circular Economy Action Plan in March. And here they said, okay, printers are wasteful products, so we have to tackle this. But we will wait to see if the sector does something voluntarily. And the date was September 2020. So the sector has done nothing voluntarily, because what we have been seeing the last years is that if there is not a regulation behind it, this will never happen. If there are no sanctions, if there is no consequence for the companies, why would they change their practices? There have been good news in the last time, so things are moving forward, but there is still a lot to be done. And this would be the first of the initiatives that we wanted to present. There are some repairing scores already done. You can go into the eFixit website and see here what they have done to see what cell phones are more or less repairable, which can be taken into account when you buy one. So going to the second initiative, here I will give the floor to Elena, because she will speak much better about this. Thank you, Elena, for being here.
My background is in European studies and international human rights law, which kind of merged well together when I started working with the FTAO. Before the FTAO, I was working a little bit as a research assistant at my university at the time, and then at the corporate sustainability, what is that, CSR, some sort of business and human rights NGO in Slovenia, where I'm from. And I started with the FTAO as a trainee in 2019. and took over our work on human rights and environmental due diligence about 4 months ago. Before that, I was helping, I was kind of supporting one of my colleagues on this work. So at the international level, here you can, on the right, you can already see UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. This is a voluntary instrument that was accepted unanimously by the Human Rights Council and in 2011, and it's quite authoritative because although it is a voluntary instrument, it was put together with years of very comprehensive research and stakeholder consultation, although arguably too much focus was given to stakeholder consultation in the industry sector and a bit less in the rights holder side. But in that sense, they were quite authoritative, even though maybe in practice the effects in global supply chains were not as good as, well, initially argued when it was said that voluntary instruments would do the trick. It has 3 pillars on looking at states' existing obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, the corporate responsibility to respect, which is kind of a new approach because before in international human rights law, only states have an obligation for these, to protect and to fulfill, to respect. We all have an obligation vis-a-vis other people and the environment in some cases. But it established the concept of human rights and environmental due diligence, under which corporate entities would need to evaluate their impacts and address these impacts and remedy harm found in order to fulfill their duty to respect. There's also an element that emphasizes the need for access to adequate remedy, in which both states and corporate entities would have to play a role, either a legal remedy, administrative remedy, or a mediating mechanism, and so on. Then in 2014, the United Nations Human Rights Council appointed an open-ended intergovernmental working group that is working on a binding instrument on the basis of the UNGPs, so the United Nations Guiding Principles. And this is called the UN Treaty, basically, in this context. And it has been going on for quite some time now. This year, we had the 7th session of the working group in October, which was attended by 71 states, which is a bit less than in the past. But what is also relevant to keep in mind is that the process was initiated and is being led by Ecuador. And in general, also mainly producer countries were those that took more active, a more active role in the process. Whereas the EU and the United States started to, participate with one remark each, more or less, this year, which is really good news. A commentary by a US organization, civil society organization that is part of this process, was that this year was the end of the beginning. So while it is quite, for now, a vague concept, because the US representative stated that they would like to work on this within the same process, but with a different proposal. So it is quite in the air. So I will not go into the details of what's in there. Good news was the European Union mentioned that whatever instrument is being developed needs to be written from a gendered perspective, which was very surprising. And the chair even asked them to repeat it for the record. So I guess we're moving forward is the conclusion. Then looking at the EU windows of opportunity, specifically related to ICT and electronics, we have since 2019 the European Green Deal that was also mentioned by Judith. And the European Green Deal envisaged a transition in a policy transition of the EU into a more sustainable future. So they often talk about the green and digital transition, for example, which is relevant, especially in this context. And under this policy framework, we have several other strategies also themselves containing several policy, legal and strategy-like documents. So Circular Economy Action Plan, the Industrial Strategy for Europe, embedding, this is a commitment to embed sustainability into corporate governance, and the Chemical Strategy. So these are the strategies that we, or commitments that we recognized as relevant for ICT and electronics. And I am showing you this just to demonstrate that there is a bunch going on, really a lot, where it can be argued for more sensitive approach to our impacts in global value chains. But would like to look a bit deeper into the sustainable corporate governance legislation, because we already started with the UN system. And the other two basically incorporate the same elements, but in a different context. And so you will also see the presentation later. So you can look deeper into the other two policies that I wanted to talk about. So basically, the point I wanted to make here is that even though we started with a voluntary initiative, really persistent civil society action, which is marked by blue at this stage, but had, like a few years ago, the entire continent was blue, has led to a few countries in the European Union already having a legislation. So we in France, Germany, and Norway. But yeah, you can see what is the trend more or less. So basically, according to this pressure that has been building, because member states have started to act themselves, and the European Union is supposed to have a unified internal market. The European Commission promised to propose a legislative proposal for a due diligence instrument at EU level, under the head of sustainable corporate governance in 2021. It has now been delayed for almost 1 year and is expected between February and March next year. But generally, the aims were to shift the focus on short-term to short-term financial returns, to a more long-term idea of what a company should strive towards. So even though probably it will remain formulated around the financial returns, they are aiming to link them to sustainability aims, so that in the long term, the aim is to reach all three pillars of sustainability: environmental, social, and economic. This goes together then with the due diligence framework that was presented in the UNGPs. And also to say that there is huge delay, there is a lot of stakeholder engagement, but there's also quite a lot of support at the civil society level and at the EU citizen level when it comes to this proposal. A lot of groundwork has been done by civil society organizations. So the public consultation that the European Commission does as part of any legislative process, as you probably know by now, has gathered more than 500,000 of responses by citizens, CSOs, and trade unions. This was kind of an electronic supported way of allowing a huge amount of people to submit their input. Usually you have to fill out the form. So it wasn't submitted in the same way as other input done through the official site of the Commission, but it demonstrates the importance and the interest in this file. And a recent YouGov survey showed that 80% of EU citizens that were asked are in favor of legislation limiting companies' behavior in global supply chains. And the same was done by the European Parliament. They proposed quite an ambitious legislative proposal, more or less, in their own initiative report that came out start of this year. So generally, this is what we're looking at. On the right is the human rights environmental due diligence framework as developed by UNGPs, then taken over by OECD, as well as the ILO. It basically became the blueprint for corporate responsibility in different mechanisms. And it is based on the idea, it's actually a corporate process that is done by businesses already to recognize risks in their operations. But this one is focused around recognizing, addressing, so seizing, preventing, mitigating, and then tracking the responses of their action when it comes to risks to the environment and to human rights in their supply chains. So on the other hand, they also couple this with ideas so to ensure that directors' duties are understood in a way because directors' duties technically are to work in favor of their companies. But the idea of what that means should be expanded to include long-term sustainability of the company and not just the end of the year financial report. This is the most disputed part of the proposal. It's also arguably one of the 3 reasons why it's taken so long for us to see the proposal. So I think it's interesting to see our recommendations here, which are translated to the next policy as well, where of course, we argue that it needs to cover the entire value chain, which I don't need to really explain after the presentation from SETEM before. And the second point that also really nicely connects to the previous presentation is that the HRDD, the due diligence process, needs to include a specific reference to addressing purchasing practices, so that when companies are assessing the potential or actual risks in their supply chains or value chains and deciding how to act upon them or how to remedy those that already happened, they also need to look at their own business practices, including pricing, so distribution of value. So it would be impossible if a company placing a cell phone on the European market suddenly decides that they will enforce specific human rights conditions on their suppliers without changing their terms of contract, without paying more for the work that is currently being drastically underpaid, and can lead to further other human rights abuses beyond lack of living wage or living income. The other points are also related to empowering actors in global supply chains to ensure that they play an active role, that they can benefit from this legislation. So preventing disengagement. So when something, a grave violation like child labor in the cobalt, in a cobalt mine in Congo is found, that the company doesn't respond by basically cutting and running, but that the company actually stays there for, well, that would need to be determined what are the minimum criteria, but that they engage, that they look at their own practices, that they look at what can be done jointly to improve the situation. So for this, long-term sourcing relationships would be important. Of course, explicitly addressing living incomes and living wages, rights holder consultation, and adoption of mission-led business models, of course, in the ideal world. So basically, the same translates to the batteries regulation, looking specifically at ICT and electronics, where the batteries regulation is aiming to these 3 points. So basically, set the aims of the EU Green Deal into practice, make electronic supply chains, value chains more circular, and address environmental and social impacts. So what is relevant here is point 3 and point 4 for us, because point 4 is the only one currently including human rights. So they have an article that would oblige that due diligence is conducted for specific either raw materials or finished products, finished batteries that contain specific raw materials, therefore that are defined by the regulation. And it's interesting here to see that they already apply it, but on our side, on our side, we took active part in the European Parliament's position making in this autumn, to make the case that this due diligence proposal needs to be strengthened by the lines of the arguments presented before. And these 2 regulations would work together, of course, with the due diligence being horizontal, And then there will be several sector-specific or product-specific instruments. There's, for example, one on cocoa, but no, so not really in our context. Similarly, we also have the sustainable products policy, and it also connects to the previous presentation in the sense that it starts with the start of the supply chain, as mentioned before. So at the design stage, how the production process and the product itself should be designed to be as sustainable as possible. Sadly, this is mainly looked at from the environmentally sustainable perspective. So one of our main arguments is that it needs to be both environmentally and socially sustainable. But they are exploring other options. We are expecting to see a legislative proposal in March this year. And also for the right to repair, I wanted to say at the beginning, this is my final slide. For the right to repair, we are expecting the legislative proposal in the summer next year, so at the EU level. So that might be exciting time as well. So when these come out, we will pull out our arguments from the drafting stage again and try to engage with both the European Parliament and the Council.
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm from Germany, as you can hear. My background is in electronics. I'm a sociologist. I have been working on the electronics industry for the last 20 years. I'm a really old person. What I've been always looking on is how globalization actually affects workers. And after a long time in academia, I kind of wanted to do something more practical, and this is why I ended up Bosch, and I do think this is really great. We work, this was the wrong slide. Okay, we work with public procurement. Public procurement might be one of the most boring areas you could think of. It's basically when your university or your city or the hospital you live next to, when they need something, when they need to buy, say, a computer or many computers, when they need to procure cars, or when they need to procure the garment that their worker will put on, they need to do public procurement. This is when public organizations buy something. It's highly regulated. That's an interesting part, and it does have a lot of volume. So it actually, if you look at the entire volume, it's several hundred billion euros that are being spent in the European Union on by public buyers. So there is some market strength to it, but it is not actually about market strength when you want to push industry some. It is actually more about how you work with the industry, and that's what we are here for. Since 2014, in the European Union, you are allowed to include social and environmental criteria into your public procurement. Before that, it was not really allowed. Now it's allowed. So now we focus on ICT, and we help public. ICT means all the desktop computers, laptop computers, and smartphones that public buyers need, and we help them to monitor the supply chains where they get the stuff from, and also to, if we find violations, to really see improvement. The important part here is that there is a cooperation between public buyers. So this is something that helps public buyers when they speak towards the industry, because it's not the city of Barcelona alone that asks things, but the city of Barcelona with other cities and with other regions and so on and so forth that actually can ask about things. So as I mentioned, you can include specific social criteria and environmental criteria into your public procurement. That's that's legal, that's fine. If you do that, you need to check whether the supplier is complying with it. That's kind of super important because you have two ways to check. Either you ask the supplier and he will tell you, yes, we are completely compliant, everything is fine in our supply chain. Or you ask an independent organization and they will look and they will unfortunately find issues. That's kind of, currently that's a given. So you have to do the monitoring best in an independent way as a public buyer. And then if you find issues in your supply chain, you have basically two options. You can end the contract, but that's really an option because as soon as you end the contract, you as an organization say, okay, we have nothing to do with forced labor. Yes, but you can't also have any influence. So that's actually bad. And you don't actually help the workers that were in your supply chain because you just ended the contract. So you actually should be working towards improvement, should be engaging with your supply chain. Doing, especially the monitoring engagement, is something that is very new for public procurement. And they need help. And that's where we kind of come in. We support them in monitoring. We do the monitoring. We support them in engagement, giving them expertise in doing the engagement. So here you see our current members. And on the map, you see in blue where they are. So we are mostly in Europe, but again, this year, we started also to have affiliates or members in Australia. These are different organizations. We have the city of Barcelona, so we have several local governments. We have the Flemish government or the Catalan government, so regional governments. We also work with the we have a lot of universities as members, and we have different other organizations like the OSCE as an international organization. So anybody who is under the rule of public procurement can actually become a member. Greenish, yellowish on the map, you see where we do money. So it is mostly in Asia, obviously. That's where electronics come from strongly. But it is also, when you look at manufacturing, it's also in countries like Poland, Czechia, and Hungary. A lot of electronics do come from Central and Eastern Europe. Up until now, we have very strongly focused only on manufacturing. But for the last 1 or 2 years, we have to develop some capability to actually also look into raw materials. So we have now a pilot project in Bolivia that is focusing on tin, and that should be focused next year on lithium too. We have a project in Congo that is focusing on cobalt. And we look at nickel in the Philippines right now, and hopefully next year also in Indonesia. These are kind of central raw materials for electronics, but also for other applications, like, for example, cars. I mentioned monitoring. You might have heard about social auditing as a specific tool how companies verify what is happening in their supply chain. We developed a different approach. We developed a different perspective. What we basically said is, this is happening again. So what we basically said is, for our monitoring, we need to put workers at the center of the monitoring. They need to be actively involved. They need to see transparency, and we need to see improvements that are measurable and that are positive for the workers. That's the part. So if we do worker development, we do interviews with workers. We ask them what is actually your grievance in the factory. We do open interviews. So it's not only about our questions that we want to ask, but it is about what they actually want to tell us. We do these interviews offsite, so they don't fear management looking at them, because that's very important, especially with vulnerable groups, forced labor victims. They need to build up trust to tell you what is happening. And now the workers are gone. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But who is doing the monitoring? It's not me or my colleagues. We work with local civil society organizations in the countries, in the regions. They are located next to the factories or in the same country as the factory. So they speak the language, they know the culture. To be very frank, they basically don't look like me, because if I go to Vietnam and start doing interviews, who will talk to me? Nobody. But they are from the country, they know how to do this. They are mostly organizations that have been working on human rights or labor rights issues for a long time. So they know how to build trust with workers, and they are also a point where workers would go to. This is very important to get really good data on what is possible. After we have done monitoring, we have a report. With this report, we go to the industry, so say to brand companies like HP, Dell, Lenovo, or Apple, and we say, okay, you have signed a contract with our affiliate, say the city of Barcelona, and in this contract you have said you will comply with specific standards. Our monitoring shows that it's not this, and this is in a factory where we found forced labor that is against the standards. Now we need, as representatives of the city of Barcelona, we need to work with you to remediate this issue. So this is where the public procurement comes in. They actually have the leverage to say, you both talk together and you kind of work this problem out. And this is actually quite successful. So after all this theoretical stuff, I'll just show you 2 case studies. This is a factory in Thailand. It is called Calcom. It's a Taiwanese company. It is producing in Thailand HP, but also for other companies. And what our monitoring partners found there was basically forced labor. So they found Myanmar migrant workers, and they found that they are paying recruitment fees, excessive recruitment fees. This is kind of a super high risk factor for forced labor. And they found that workers did, or the employer took away their passports, work permits, also high risk of forced labor, and they were coerced to cover up excessive recruitment fees. So they were basically told, don't tell what you have paid, because it's illegal. What we did the monitoring, we did the engagement with the industry. Within several weeks, workers were returned the passports and the work permit. That's easy. But it is about the money. If you have paid 3 or 4 monthly salaries of recruitment fees, you need to get this money back. And this took us around 2 years, because it was one of the first cases we have had with the industry on this scale. And they are really slow with these kind of things. But after 2 years, we were able to see fully reimbursement for over 10,000 workers. And this is really this shows you how strong public procurement can be if it is applied rightly, if it is not only about labels and certification, but it takes the time to work with the industry. A different case, this was in Indonesia, where our monitoring partner found in one factory, workers were fainting, they had respiratory illnesses, and they were using toluene. It's a very toxic cleaning solvent, and it's actually illegal in the European Union to be contained even in products. Don't talk about production. So we went to the brand company again with a report, and we said to them, well, look, it's an issue. We want to work with you. And this went really fast. Within, I think, a month, they told us we replaced the toluene with something else. We went back to the workers and asked them, is this true? And they said, yes, this is true. And then we also saw that the ventilation system was repaired and workers received more effective protective equipment. So again, huge improvement. We are very much aware that, this factory by factory work, it's very effective on factory level. But if you look on how many workers and factories you actually have in the electronic supply chain, that's much more. So it's a challenge. But there is the model of using public procurement as a leverage to push the industry towards improvement is actually something that can successfully applied. We've been now working for the last years on this, and we see improvements, we see movement. It's much too slow, but it is there.